The subject of today's video is why fathoming the geometry of the infinite is the only means through which humanity can overcome its infancy. And by infancy, I mean its ridiculous squabbles over real estate and resources that we apparently believe that this planet has to offer us. Firstly, the idea of what the infinite is must be produced. If we look at the progress that society has made in its understanding of the infinite, we find something out about ourselves, about our own minds, about our own creative powers. For instance, every child growing up today has the ability to use the invention without necessarily understanding how it was derived of the infinite point as an artistic perspective. The point at infinity is a type of projective space. Now, there are different types of projective space. If we look at the recession, for example, on your screen right now, my face would be at a kind of a point of infinity. And we can draw lines that proceed from all directions of this rectangle that I'm in, such that they meet at that point of infinity. However, that point of infinity is on a flat two-dimensional rectangle. If we then proceed to think about the difference between that space, that flat two-dimensional space, as opposed to a curved space, and how that curved space proceeds to infinity. For example, we'll take the plane and rearrange this flat plane such that the plane itself, it is a basis for a sphere on that plane. And we project points through the sphere to the North Pole of that curved surface, that sphere. Then what we see is the point of infinity is at the North Pole. And we have a different type of space. We have a projected space from the flatness onto a regular type of curvature. That regular type of curvature is a type also of infinity, but it's a curved infinity, a positively curved infinity. We can take the same principle instead of having a spherical infinity and have a type of projection upon a saddle or negative curved space. One way we can do that is what Gauss came up with, which is what's called a normal mapping. Now that normal mapping can exist for anywhere in any type of curved space, whether it be negative, flat, or positive, of any type of positive curvature. It doesn't have to be spherical in particular. It can be hyperbolic, it can be open-ended, it can be a cone, which is a type of flat space. But the idea of a normal is that at any one particular space, any one particle of space, any one well-defined neighborhood of that space, you can have the principle of the derivative or the tangent to that space, looking at where its tendency is going. It creates a kind of moment of curvature to the next space around it. That the normal is what is perpendicular to that tangent plane touching at that space, and it has a value. However, Gauss created a scheme whereby you can now take a unit sphere, such that the unit sphere that I talked about earlier is kind of a universal surface. And upon that unit sphere, you can take any portion of space that is positive, negative, or flat, physical space, and you can map these normals onto it. And in the extended space that we're referencing here, you may have many normals which overlap. It is the overlapping of those normals which creates sheets in that space. Now, the student of Gauss, his most creative student, and in fact, the man who took geometry of the infinite to its furthermost, I'll get to that in a second, a little bit more, it was Bernard Riemann. And Riemann took a type of extraordinary function of space itself and showed that through those particular points, those normals, you can define them as not just a point, but rather as a branch to different functional spaces themselves. Which is to say, through a particular point on that extended space, you can show that those spaces themselves are types of functions. By types of functions, what we mean is that there is a regularly defined value that defines overall an infinite possibility of development within that particular sheet or space, that particular type of space. Those sheets have a tremendous potential. And what I want to go into right now, just for a moment, is the difference between probabilities and possibilities. A lot of what is considered to be advanced mathematics or geometry today is the idea of probabilities, a kind of degenerate space, in my thinking, whereby you look at what is going to transpire in terms of material processes as probabilities. and you try to come up with the most likely probabilities for some type of function within physical reality. Like, for example, let's look at how the functions of stars form, how they are perhaps composed of a nexus of energy and matter that is accumulated together in such a way as to intensify and create eventually stars, planets, the stuff that everything is in the final analysis made of, including you and me. We hypothesize and we show through physical reproduction of experiments that matter itself can be transmuted by enough energy. That is to say, in the center of stars, we show that the process of thermonuclear fusion will give us up to iron. But we also know beyond that, as a star explodes, the creation of elements that are of a higher gravity and mass than iron, all the way up through the transuranic elements, can also be created by a shock wave of that explosion. A force which has a tremendous impact and that is let loose, so to speak, among the space outside of the star itself. Now, the humanity is at the point of controlling and reining in those very processes by which we see creation of new types of matter among the stars. And we can take it steps further, of course, and look at the way in which whole star systems themselves interact and create themselves new possibilities. And let's go back to the issue of possibilities, because remember, the first thing I've mentioned just a moment ago was the idea of probabilities. What probably will be created in the conjunction of whole solar systems and whole, let us say, galaxies or groups of galaxies via their various types of coming into new formations of matter. We as a human race are really in the infancy of our understanding of this. And that idea of us being in the infancy of understanding the geometry of infinity is critical, because let's look at this. Every human being has the potential to understand what I'm talking about. This was proven thousands of years ago via the writings of Plato, where in particular one dialogue, the Meno, the understanding of a mere slave boy went further by that slave boy being led to ask the correct questions went as far as the most profound knowledge of geometry at that epoch of human history. By doing that, what Plato was doing was saying, look, mind is universal. None of us has a corner or an exclusive understanding of the infinite. It's there for us all. Remember, and when I started this video, I talked about perspective and how each child has the ability to understand the point at infinity. And we can take it further and then think about how the human mind itself has a type of infinite within it. In other words, the human mind itself, thinking in a certain way about it, has an infinite possibility. That infinite possibility is the ability of our minds individually, and thereby, of course, through communication collectively, to encompass types of infinity that can take us out of what you might call our infancy. Because really, as long as we're stuck on this planet, humanity is in its infancy. And we think we're fighting each other over limited, fixed things and resources. Like an infant, we see things out there, and we say we have to have our things. We have to fight for our things because those things are limited. They're finite, just like us. We're finite. That's all we are, just finite beings. But if we move ourselves ahead to the infinite power of possibility, not probability, but possibility of human creative thinking, then we see, wait a second, the supposed so-called finite resources of this planet Earth are not all we have. My God, we just described the fact that we are able to encompass the creation of new elements via nuclear fusion, and then beyond nuclear fusion within the stars via shock waves as stars explode. If we can take that power and get ourselves off this planet, which we can, because again, we've already demonstrated the mere use of chemical explosions, which are far, far inferior, less powerful than nuclear explosions. And that there's types of nuclear explosions, as we know. And we know that there's that fusion explosions demonstrated with the H-bomb, for example, unfortunately, that we can all destroy ourselves with if we are really infantile and are fighting over the real estate, the so-called fixed resources on this planet, which is an illusion. We know that we can go outside this planet, outside this solar system, to find a home among other planetary systems, among the stars. And we can literally populate the universe with potentially infinite resources within it that we don't even know about. For example, we know that these supernovae that create these new elements, we also know that there's a type of antimatter that's even beyond our wildest imaginings of power, that the power even in the hydrogen bomb, hydrogen fusion, itself will be left behind by orders of degrees of magnitude with matter-antimatter reactions. So we can see this potential. We can see this possibility as opposed to probability. That's key, because you see, we're caught up in science right now with the idea of probabilities, of looking at a two-dimensional grid, x and y axis, and creating among that grid a curve and saying, let's see where our probabilities meet this curve. Let's use that as a method, Cartesian method, if you will. But as Leibniz rightly pointed out, that's missing the forest for the trees, Descartes. You're looking merely at momentum. You're not looking at acceleration. You're not looking at something which is far more powerful than anything you've imagined via this imaginary two-dimensional plane, this flatness. We have to go beyond flatness into a principle of curvature. This was the idea that Gauss developed by looking at the number, so-called imaginary number I, and realizing that that creates a plane in itself, a complex plane, wherein you have more than just a grid of flatness. You have a rotational and expansional capability within that flatness. And then, said Gauss, we can take that a step further and use my principle of a unit sphere. We can map upon all the potential curvature everywhere, going beyond the principle of infinity of flatness, that we can extend boringly, as total boring, uninteresting extension. We can say, no, we have a different type of extension. It's the extension that is only understood from the standpoint of the creative capacity of human reason. Because as Leibniz demonstrated, the idea of a monad is a type of infinity, which is a complete unity. And that monad, there are different degrees of monad. We're talking about a biological entity. Lower monads are not really thinking. They have a will, they have a struggle to survive, just as all the living forms that we know do. But then human creative thought is of a higher sort of monad, said Leibniz. And that higher sort of unified monad is what, in fact, is the power, the higher substance, the higher possibility, as opposed to mere probability, that will get us off this planet and get us to realize that, hey, we got to leave this infancy of squabbling over real estate and so-called fixed resources behind. We have to leave it. And that's what true progress and statesmanship, statecraft should be truly about. Bringing together human minds to create the types of self-governing principles, not necessarily, all of the worked out forms themselves, because that's secondary. It's the principles that get us beyond. It's the idea of creating, going back to Plato, a republic that will nurture above all else that creative human spirit. And there's a necessity which must be met previously as our biological substrate. It's necessary to free ourselves from the mere concerns of the biological substrate, which means we must have what Franklin Roosevelt described in his idea of what the United Nations was set up to be, to end want, to end poverty, to end disease, to make it possible for each human being to contribute to their utmost to the future unraveling of the knowable potential, the knowable possibility of human ideas, the greatness of human ideas, to uplift ourselves and into eventually populating the stars. If you liked my video and you see it as something which you need to tell others about, hit the like, subscribe to it, and share it. With that, I will leave you for today. It's August 1st, 2023. Thanks again for watching. Have a great rest of your week, your month, your life, etc.